Hey y'all, Pastor Jake here. Just wanted to thank you for joining us online. Our hope and prayer is that you encounter the presence of God while you enjoy this service. God bless. I talked about it last Sunday. I've talked about it the last couple weeks. There's a prophecy that went out over this church, 4 months of miracles. And I growing up in Pentecostal roots, I grew up where it's like you hear someone prophesy and I'm like, that one sounds legitimate. That one doesn't sound legitimate. You know what I mean? So I fight that a little bit. When that was prophesied over this church, I believed it with everything in me, you know, that the people in this church over the next 4 months are going to experience things that we all go, only God could do that. You know, Pastor Jake didn't do it. That incredible prayer partner that was standing with me at the altar didn't do it. It was only God did it. Hey COL family, we want to give you guys the opportunity to give. All you have to do is go to colbaytown.com/giving, hit the blue button. We appreciate your generosity and hope this service blesses you. Last week we talked, we went to the Gospel of John and we talked about that, what John calls the first sign of Jesus, right? And I wanted to look this week at what he calls the second sign. These are miracles, right? John records these miracles for all of us, but he calls them signs. And I wanted to go over the second one because I want us to have an expectant heart. I've been coming to this church each day with an expectant heart that I'm going to see God do things in people's lives that I can't do. I'm going to see God do things in my life that I can't do. And this last week, this sounds like a small one, but this one's huge to me. This is God moving. There's someone in this church that had been praying for someone to visit this church for years. They've been praying for this person for years. And last Sunday, the person walked into the church. And that's a miracle, y'all. Has anyone prayed for something for so long and you know, started to think, well, you know, maybe it's just not going to happen. Maybe I didn't hear God. But then it happens and you know, oh my goodness, like he is so good and so faithful. That builds you up in a way that when you see someone else that's really trying to believe and going through a hard time, you have hope in your heart for them because you see that God's done that in your life, that, you know, you just kind of have to keep walking, right? Just keep walking, keep believing. It's going to happen in his time. You know, that's the big thing. We get mixed up between our time and his time. And his time is perfect timing. So I want us to look at this second sign that John shows us here. All right, and he calls them signs, right? Because why? We talked about this last Sunday. Because signs point beyond itself, right? You're heading to Houston. You see a sign for Houston. You don't stop at the sign and take a picture. That would be crazy, right? You go, okay, it's in this direction. That's the way that I'm moving, okay? So we have to also understand that these miracles that we're reading about, that's not the destination. It's not about the miracle, really. Miracles are good. Miracles are great, and I am showing up to this church every day expecting to see miracles, but that's not the destination. A relationship with Jesus is the destination. So last week we were reading about that wedding in Cana. Now that's where he turned the water into wine if you weren't here. We discovered that every detail in that story points us right back to him, right? Anybody remember that? The wedding revealed Jesus' heart, okay? We talked about how the jars revealed his mission and that the wine revealed his kingdom to come. So now John's going to take us back to Cana. This is the same town, but this is a completely different story, all right? Last week, Jesus was saving, in that story, he was saving a family from their potential shame, right? Yeah. This week is different. This week's got a lot of desperation, right? So before we begin, I just want to kind of help you to understand when we're believing for God to move in our lives, we have to understand that sometimes he's going to answer those prayers in ways that we didn't expect. When we're believing for a miracle, we should understand that the miracle is not what we should focus on. Our circumstances are not what we should focus on. We should turn around and look at what he's doing in us during the time that we wait. I think many of you understand that the best, like one of the most incredible, the reason I'm always like, Jesus is faithful, Jesus is faithful. I sound like a broken record, but it's because I can look back on my life and see that even though he didn't like answer the prayer exactly how I wanted it to, he answered it the perfect way for what he had me going into. Like he was preparing me. He was purposely closing doors. I think I've told the story about how I applied for this job that I was like, I should have got the job. Should have got it. I was had all the things that they needed. Didn't get the job. It's only now that I understand why I didn't get that job. I would not be at this church if I would have picked that job up. My life would have been too comfortable, it would have been too good, and it would have been really hard for me to give it up and come to the church. But I couldn't see that during that time. So we have to understand that no matter how much we wait, God's working, right? So we have to understand that faith is not believing that God will always do exactly what we ask. Faith is believing that God is who he says he is, that his word can be trusted, and that whatever he does, he will always be faithful. So I'm going to jump right to it. John chapter 4, we're going to go through verse 46 to 54. Can y'all hold on with me for those verses? All right. I'm going to read it like I'm going to be a narrator. What's that? Earl Jones? What was his name? James Earl Jones. I'm going to be that good if God wills it. Okay. Stick with me here. All right, we're going to jump to it. Verse 46. This is an amazing story. We should be reading these stories so we have expectant hearts for what God can do in our lives. If we don't, we just kind of roll through the world, roll through life, and we think, well, that's the Bible, it's different. They wore sandals, no, this is for you. These people are humans just like you and I, right? So let's read this. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water to wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had came from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he believed himself believed, and all of his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. The miracle right there is really quick, right? Jesus just says the word, and then you're immediately transported to him getting back to his house and them telling him, he was healed. He's recovering. If we were to take that short little story that we just went over and lay that story out, where would most of the time be spent? It would be on the road. It would be walking. If we were to take that story that I just read and we laid it out in real time, most of it we would be walking. Okay? 20 miles from where he was at to get to where Jesus was, and then 20 miles back. Most of that journey was a man walking. So I want to jump into 3 questions because I think that's where most of us, I know that's where most of us in some area of our life, most of us are walking from point A to point B. We're between God's word and what he said, his promise, and the fulfillment of that promise. Every person in here, some of us really big things, some of us small things, but relatively to us, they're all huge, right? Every one of us has some place in our life where we know what God said, but we don't see it, and we're walking. We're on a journey, okay? Every one of us. So I want to ask 3 questions of this story that just kind of help me understand it better. First one's this. Why did the Father come? Why did the Father come to Jesus? I think this is a simple answer. Need drove him to Jesus. His need drove him to Jesus. So we see here at verse 46, so he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water into wine, in Capernaum, and at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. John immediately reminds us where we are. We're back in Cana, the place that we saw the first sign, but this time it's all changed. There's a little boy that's dying. John tells us that this man was an official. Why does he throw that detail in there? Y'all, the Bible is full of these details that matter. They really matter. And when you spend some time just sitting there thinking about it and asking some basic questions, you actually see how beautiful this story is, right? So most scholars believe that he served King Herod. All right? So this was a man with influence. He had money. He had position. He had authority. If anyone could afford the best doctors, it would be this guy, right? Yet here he is. He's traveled 20 miles from Capernaum to Cana. Why? Because all of his power, all of his authority, all of his money, all of his ability did not work out when it came to his son getting better. None of it. His resources were tapped. He couldn't save his son. Is anyone like me, have you seen that pain has an amazing way of revealing what's really important in your life? Am I the only one that's figured that out? That when it really hurts, I start to actually see things a lot clearer. When life is comfortable, when it's easy, it's real easy for me to think that I'm in control. That's something I struggle with. As soon as things start to get easy and I get comfortable, I start going, I got this. I got it handled. Totally got this all under control. But when the phone rings, or you get a call from the doctor, or your marriage begins to fall apart, or your job disappears, suddenly the things that we've depended on, that we've held on to, they're simply not enough. So this is where this father has found himself. He has reached the end of himself. And y'all, that's sometimes exactly where faith begins. I know for me, that's where faith has begun in my life, when I've come to the absolute end of myself. I'll tell you this, God doesn't waste your pain. He does not waste your pain. We live in a broken world, so people get sick. Things don't work out. Dreams don't, come to fruition. But God is so good that he can redeem even the things that were meant to destroy you. I've seen this in my life. So this father's greatest crisis, and this is a crisis, the man is walking 20 miles because he can't find a fix for his son. And his greatest crisis becomes the road that leads him to Jesus. Let's look at verse 47. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. It's real important right there. What did he do? He went to him. He's got this incredible need. He's in this pain. He's immediately went to Jesus. Here's a quick question for y'all. When things fall apart, when your Sunday doesn't go perfect, Your Sunday nap doesn't happen. Anybody been there? Anybody love that Sunday nap and it doesn't happen? Where do you go when that doesn't work out? Where do you go when like the real serious things don't work out? Where do you go? Do you go to money to fix it? Do you go to anger? Do you go at saying, God, like, what are you doing? I did so good this last week. I went to church twice. Where are you at? This father ran to Jesus. He ran to Jesus. We should always remember that the first thing that we do when we have a need is we run to Jesus. It's very simple. We talked about it with Mary in the last story, right? What did she say? We're running out of wine, Jesus. She wasn't like jumping on the ground, saying amazing words. She just said, hey, we're running out of wine, leaving it up to you to fix it how you see fit. This father's doing the same thing. So this father finds Jesus. He's walked 20 miles. Who's walked a long distance? Anybody? Anybody walked a long distance? All right. That door back there is not considered a long distance. 20 miles, if you're not aware, is where your feet start barking like crazy. Like you feel like that one toe that's always been messed up is going to officially fall off. Maybe that's just me. Like 15 is where it all starts getting torn up real good. 20, you're going, oh my goodness. Like each step is very hard, right? Let's think about this real quick. He wasn't in nice shoes. He was in sandals. 20 miles. He's got to be thinking, he's got to be hoping, if I can just get my son or get Jesus to my son, everything will be okay. Surely Jesus is just going to be like, see my need and come with me. But he doesn't. Instead, Jesus gives him something that he wasn't expecting. He wanted Jesus' presence, but Jesus gave him his word. I feel like in our group of church, how we church it, we love the presence of God. I love it. It's amazing. Worship is amazing. There have been times where I wanted his presence, but all I had was his word. And I'm running around and I'm like, well, if you would just show up, Lord, in this closet, if you would just show up, I'd feel so much better. But the truth is I had this book that now is conveniently on your phone. That's amazing. Full of his promises and his word. And he's not going to let you down if he says it in his word. So he wanted his presence, but God gave him his word. Jesus gave him his word. So why didn't Jesus, this brings us to the second question. Why didn't Jesus go? Well, I think Jesus wanted the Father to trust his word. I think Jesus knew that we would talk about this story for 2,000 years, and he wanted all of us to believe his word when he said it. We look at this, verse 47. He went to him and he asked, come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. I just see a desperate man in this moment. That he's not giving his speech. This is a father that's desperate. I think every parent in this room understands that feeling. I think it was last year. My daughter, was having trouble breathing. It's going on for a couple days. It got to a point where I'm standing in front of her and she cannot breathe. She's gasping, but you can't hear any air. I haven't been that scared ever in my life. I've been in a lot of situations that people would say are like super scary, that they hail in comparison to that moment where I could do nothing. I could do nothing. I was just hoping that God would give her the ability to breathe, because I couldn't do anything for her. When something like that happens, where this father was at, his money didn't matter. His authority didn't matter. His reputation didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was getting help for his child. So the father has this plan, these 20 miles, you got to be thinking about it. He's got one hope, that Jesus will come with him, that Jesus will lay his hand on his son and that he'll be healed. But Jesus has another plan. Instead of saying, all right, let's go, Jesus says something that's kind of unexpected. When I read this, I just kept kind of looking at it like, man, he's kind of being mean. He says this, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. I'm like, that sounds harsh. How am I going to, Lord, that sounds harsh. Like, what does that mean? Well, when you look at the word you there, it's actually plural. It's plural. So Jesus isn't speaking only to that father. He's speaking to everyone that's standing around the father. Galilee had become fascinated with his miracles. People wanted the signs. They wanted to see the power on display. They wanted Jesus to fix their problems. But many of the people didn't actually want Jesus. That's true today, isn't it? It's possible to want what Jesus can do for you without really wanting him. We say this thing, Jesus is my Lord. Maybe it's we haven't watched enough medieval times movies. But the Lord was in charge of everything. You say he's the Lord of your life, but you really just bring him the stuff that you want him to fix. I've been there. I've done that. I've been like, oh, don't worry about that over there that you keep bringing up to me, Jesus. We don't want to talk about that today. I would just love if you could just fix this thing for me, and my faithfulness will be based off what you fix. Jesus wasn't rejecting this father. He was exposing the crowd. The father doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He simply says, sir, come down before my child dies. I just see this desperate man that's traveled 20 miles, not on a road, through the wilderness, in sandals. And he's not arguing with Jesus. He's just simply asking. He's desperate. Sir, come down before my child dies. He simply brings his need to Jesus. And then Jesus speaks, go, your son will live. That's it. He doesn't touch him. He doesn't say a dramatic prayer. He doesn't lay hands on him. Just his word. People come to church a lot of times and they want to experience. They want experience. Don't get me wrong. I want to experience God's presence. I love worship. When God shows up and starts to move in people's hearts, and he's moving in my heart. But sometimes we can get so tied to that experience that we forget his word. I'll talk to someone, and 1 week after the service, the presence of God has been there. They've had an experience with Jesus, okay? God has done something in their heart. And by Wednesday, Pastor, could you just pray for me? I'm not saying that asking for prayer is an issue. But I'm going, what? I believe his word. Do you not believe his word today? Get up. Get up. We're stuck on feelings sometimes. And we're losing time when we're stuck in our feelings. We're losing time when our focus is the circumstances and not on what he's doing in me while I wait. I'm happy y'all clapped because I was a little worried people would be upset about that. I'm like in my room last night and I'm like, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. Well, what if they get mad at you? I'm like, well, I don't know. Lord, help me, God. So there was no touch. There was no dramatic prayer. It was just his word. That is powerful. It was just his word. The Father wanted his presence. Jesus gave him a promise, though. We've all noticed in our lives that God doesn't always answer the prayer the way that we expect. Sometimes we ask God to change those circumstances, and instead what he does is strengthens our faith. Sometimes we ask him to remove the storm, and instead he teaches us to trust him while we hold on for dear life. Anybody in here held on for dear life at times? The Father asked Jesus to come. Jesus simply said, go. Then John tells us this: the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. That's verse 50. This is the turning point, and this is what makes this story really get going to me. Okay? Before the healing, before there was any testimony of God's goodness, there was a faith move. There was faith in action. Notice that nothing has changed at this point. His son is still 20 miles away. All he has is Jesus' word. He hasn't seen a miracle. He has no confirmation. Nothing around him at that present point looks any different. Just Jesus' word. That's it. The word of Jesus is all he has. The word of Jesus was all he needed. It was enough. Hebrews 11:1 says this: now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Not seen. That's where faith lives. The father turned around and started walking home before he ever knew whether his son had lived or died. From 50 to 51, there is a 20-mile journey. If he had really awesome servants, they made up 5 or 10 miles. If he had lazy servants, they showed up like the last 100 meters. He had a long distance he had to travel. He had a lot of steps that he had to take where he was battling. Do y'all think he wasn't battling? Do you think his faith was just absolutely perfect? I don't. We don't see here what happens between verse 50 and 51. There's an assumption on our part. But I think John knows that every reader has been in between the Word of God, the promise of God, and the actual provision of the Lord. We've all been in that in between. Every step, every mile, he had another opportunity to doubt. What if I misunderstood Jesus? What if I'm too late? What if I get there and nothing's changed? He's still in the bed. He's still sick. Many of us have been there as well. Waiting, hoping. Here's the point. Do not stop walking. Do not stop walking. The Father is living between verse 50 and verse 51. So verse 50 says this: the man believed and went on his way. There's a 20-mile journey in there. In sandals, you know. Verse 51 says this: as he was going down, his servants met him. That's a journey between those two verses. He doesn't tell us how the Father was thinking in those moments and in each step, but he's between the promise and the fulfillment. He's between believing the words of Jesus and actually seeing it come to fruition in front of him. I know I've been there a lot in my life. I'm there currently in certain parts of my life. I'm between verse 50 and verse 51. I know what I've read in God's word. I know what God's told me. But I can't see those things. I don't even see a pathway to get there. But I'm still walking. I can't give up. If I look back on my life, He's been too faithful. If I look in his word, he's forever faithful. So I've got this promise, I've got his word, and it's saying this one thing, but I can't see it. I've got to keep walking. Here's the point. If you're in that place, which many of us are, you have God's promise, you know what God said, you have his word, but you can't see it, keep moving. You don't have to do anything wazoo. I've met a lot of people that immediately, they're like, yeah, I'm just walking. It's not happening fast enough, Pastor Jake. So what I'm going to do is do some dance moves. And maybe if I do that down at the altar, God will immediately just give me what he's asked for. I'm not saying dancing at the altar's not good. Okay? I dance over there sometimes. I'm like this. This is my dancing. This is my level of getting down. I'm like, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes. That's my level of get down. Someday it might break out into more. I don't know. I'm working on it. But I've met people that, they think they've got to do extra because it's not moving fast enough. It's not moving fast enough because you're focused on the miracle that you want to see and you're not focused on what he's trying to do in you. And he wants to do something in every one of us. So if we look at this next day, while the father is still walking, the servants come running towards him. And before he reaches home, God confirms what Jesus has spoken. And John includes one small detail. This detail is why I ask the next question. Okay, third question, why does John tell us the exact hour? Okay, I believe that John wants us to know that it's not a coincidence, that it's Christ. This just wasn't good timing. This was a God move. This is what only he could do. Beginning in verse 51, as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. Can you imagine that moment? Covering all that distance, walking home with nothing except the promise of Jesus, and then in the distance you see your servants running towards you. I think when he sees those servants, there's got to be a little worry there too. Really, think about it. He's traveling all this distance. He's fighting just like all of us do. He's fighting with, did I hear God? Is his word going to be true? And he sees them running. Is this good? Is this bad? Is he dead? Is he alive? And then I'm sure they shouted out, he's alive. Can you imagine the relief? But then the father asked this question that kind of seems strange, but it makes sense. At what hour did he begin to get better? He wants to know one thing. Was this coincidence or was this Christ? Yes. The servants answer, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. Then John says, not Jesus, be careful there. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. Don't miss that, y'all. What he's showing us there, the miracle happened the moment Jesus spoke. The miracle happened the moment Jesus spoke. Some of us are still wondering if it's going to come to pass. The longer that I keep on this path, the more I realize I should just stop worrying about stuff. My worry is not helping anything. When I'm worrying, I'm stepping outside of what God's called me to be, and that's a man of faith, to believe his word. It's often how life works. We rarely do we understand what God is doing in the moment. Did he understand exactly when God said that your son will live, what God was doing in that moment? That supernaturally he was healing a man 20 miles away or a boy 20 miles away? I think all of us have looked back in our life and we realize that God was protecting us in certain seasons. He was preparing us in certain seasons. He was opening doors that we couldn't see. You realize looking back that he was working all along. And that's exactly what this father experiences. Looking back, he realizes that the exact moment Jesus spoke was when his son was healed. It's important for us to remember what God has done in our life because those testimonies remind us that God is still faithful. I've got a Rolodex, I think Rolodex, right? That's the old thing that you go through, of memories that I go to when I hear a report that doesn't line up with what God said. I go back to that truck where God met me. I go back to a place that I never can really explain how dark it was. And He's snatching me out of it. I go right back there because when I get there, I remember that He's faithful. And then the thing that I'm looking at in front of me, it gets smaller. In comparison to Him, it gets smaller. So I straighten my back up a little bit. I don't act like the problem's not there, but I don't drag myself in. How you doing, bud? Oh, well, you know how last week I was really happy about what God had said? There was 2 or 3 days between then and here. And life has been lifing. I don't even know if I use that properly. Life has been lifing. Felt good. I'll put that in my back pocket and use it later. Try it again. Here's the point. The greatest miracle. John says this in verse 53, and He Himself believed, and all His household. Didn't He already believe? Right? John says that He already believed, yes. But now His faith has become deeper. He didn't trust Jesus just for the miracle. There's a lot of Christians that trust Jesus for a miracle, but they don't trust Him as their Messiah. We want the miracle, and I'm like, I got faith. I've got faith. Don't want to talk to you about any of this other stuff that you're bringing up, Jesus. So he has a deeper faith now. He trusted Jesus as the Messiah. The healing changed his son, but the faith changed his family. That's what God's greatest goal is. Physical healing is wonderful. Thank you for it. Financial provision, that's wonderful. Open doors are wonderful. But every miracle points to something even greater, a relationship with Jesus. Him being the Lord over your life. If you think about it, every miracle here on earth, it's temporary. That boy was healed. That boy grew up, hopefully lived a long life, and he died. So is this story about the miracle? It's not about the miracle, right? It's about who Jesus is. We have to understand that that boy eventually died, but salvation, that's eternal. We've been called not to live in this world. Live beyond it. Live in the eternal. This story is not simply just to tell us that Jesus can heal, but it's to tell us, and he's building it through the Gospel of John, that Jesus is the Son of God. That's why he's saying signs instead of miracles. He's pointing to something greater. So I want to conclude with this. Pastor Todd, if you'd come up and play. I feel way more anointed when Pastor Todd plays. Don't miss what the second sign teaches us. The greatest miracle in this story isn't that the boy got better. The greatest miracle happened before the father ever got home. It's a father trusted Jesus. Between verse 50 and 51, there's no words there, but there is a journey that is very hard. There is a man on a road, on a path. All he has is the Word of God. That's all he has. He can't see that anything has actually changed. He's heard God's promise, but he hasn't seen God's provision. Some of us are still walking home in some form or fashion this week. Maybe this next week. Maybe over the next couple months, you're facing something. I would just encourage you just to keep walking, to keep praying, to keep trusting and believing in Him. The truth is while we're walking, God is working. And a lot of times He's working in us. We have to understand that the one that made the promise is always faithful. I am so excited about life. I am so encouraged because I just constantly keep seeing God do things that make me go, He is faithful and He's got my back. I have moments where fear jumps up, and in those moments, I take my Bible, which is on my phone most of the time, and I cut it in half. It's a weapon, and I use that weapon. And then I come back to a moment of just going, God, you're faithful. I know what you said. I'm going to show up Wednesday and throw down hard. I'm going to show up Sunday and go for it. This is a narrow path, and sometimes you're between verse 50 and 51. Do not give up. Reach out to people. If you're dragging yourself here, don't let my jokes about people dragging themselves in keep you from dragging yourself in, okay? But I am going to tell you to straighten your back. And I'm going to tell you, remember the time that you were completely lost and that He saved you? Remember that what was the time that God did something that only He could do? Tell me about that. And usually what happens is the person starts to straighten up and hope starts to come into their heart and they start to remember that He's faithful. And the great thing is that you will then spend time with someone that can't see His faithfulness, and you'll share a testimony that encourages their heart, that they can grab onto and builds hope in them. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be little hope dealers. I wasn't even thinking about saying that. It just came out. COL, full of hope dealers. For real. For real. There's a guy I talked to at the gas station. He's usually in a terrible mood. He's always in a terrible mood. But I just keep going in there. And every time I go in there, I kind of have to get myself ready because sometimes I'm not feeling it. You know, just to be honest with you, I'm not feeling on like, oh, he's going to tell me something terrible. Because he always has something really bad to say, you know. And I just go in there and I'm like, you're alive. Most of the time I'm like, well, at least you're alive. And he's like, yeah, that's true. I am alive. And I'm like, oh my God, Lord, help me. Next time I got to think of something good. When I drive away, I always think of something better to tell him. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us online. I hope and pray that the service blessed you. I want to give you a quick invite to come out this Sunday, 10 a.m. We're here in Baytown, Texas, 120 South Alexander Street. Come and enjoy the service in person with other believers. God bless.